Okay, so very good morning to all of you. So welcome to the test one discussion of our test. The people who have joined in online, I'll just again tell you that, and those of you who are, let's say, are not the part of the course, the question paper has already been shared on Sunya IAS PSIR channel. Okay. So you can see the PSIR channel, and there you can find the test. So the question one, or which is the test one, has been uploaded. So first I'll tell you about the test. The syllabus of the test included 3 topics. We had political theory, then you had theories of state, and third you had justice. Okay, and overall in the test you have 9 questions, and the questions are also there in the manner that you are also practicing 10 markers, 15 markers, and 20 markers. Okay. Now, how many of you were able to write all the 9 questions? किस किसने लिखे हैं? आपने लिखे हैं? अभी अच्छा आपने क्वेश्चन पेपर देखा है? या अभी डायरेक्टली अच्छा क्वेश्चन पेपर देखा है? ठीक है. People online as well. How many of you were able to see some of, or have you at least seen these questions? Okay, so the purpose of the discussion for today is, see, not only will I be telling you how to write, okay, but again based on the knowledge that you already have, okay, and how to at least address all the demand, what essentially should be in a good political science answer. We do a lot of these sessions for GS, right? But बहुत बार क्या होता है that we don't know exactly what to fulfill the demand, right? बहुत बार क्या होता है that I don't know, in this test also you have some direct questions which are directly from the syllabus. Let's say pluralist theory of state, सीधे पूछा आपसे. Difference between liberal and Marxist theory of state, direct है. But then there are some interpretative question, very right. These are more analytical in nature. यहाँ पे you have to apply your mind. For example, a question was political theory is not dead. Okay, it is evolving. So these are some interpretative questions, and I know for these questions everybody will write a slightly different answer. Okay, so here this is one thing, right? Then in addition to this, I've also included some quote-based questions. Okay, so this is also one thing that one needs to understand. Okay, so you have direct questions, you have interpretative questions, you have some quote-based questions. All the 3 are combined, right? So especially in the quote-based question, let's say we have a question on feminist theory of state, but वो quote-based question है, उसको भी कैसे आंसर करना है, that also is something that is to be understood, right? So otherwise if I directly give you direct questions, you will not understand as much. So there will be some questions जहाँ पे you have to apply your mind. In some questions you may not exactly know कि मुझे इसको deconstruct करना कैसे है, because every year, because very soon you will also see the paper of 2025. Okay, 31st को Pol Science का paper है, that also we'll analyze and discuss, right? So this is exactly how things are going to be planned in this manner. Okay, so I think till here everybody is able to follow, people who are there online as well. Okay, ठीक है. So चलो, I think we'll begin one by one. So we are starting with the very first question. Discuss the evolution, right? And directly questions से शुरू करेंगे. And in all these questions, what we will be aiming for. See, the questions generally in your mind, you should think in this manner: introduction, body, conclusion. You don't have to write this explicitly, but exactly this is what should be followed, right? Now, discuss the evolution of approaches to study of political theory with special reference to normative and empirical traditions. ठीक है? These are the two prominent traditions that we generally see. ठीक है? और हमें we have to discuss the evolution of these approaches. Okay? Now, how will you introduce such a question? अभी देखो यहाँ पे, because the discussion is live, you also have the opportunity to ask me what doubts you are facing in all these questions. कहीं पे कुछ phrase करना था, you are not able to understand, and then especially in the body, what things could have been added, right? Because this question is a very broad question. A similar question has already been asked. Discuss the evolution in Western political thought. अब आप सोचो from Plato to almost Hannah Arendt. It's a very broad question. Yes or no? So here also when I see discuss the evolution of approaches to study of political theory, and then you have to give a special reference to normative and empirical traditions. Any idea how you start it? Right? ठीक है? Anything else that we can think in this? इसके अलावा कुछ और पॉइंट मेंशन कर सकते हैं? देखो, इंट्रोडक्शन में you can also start with directly a quote based or basic introduction of political theory. जैसे कि there is a famous quote, for example, you don't have to remember it, but that political theory is the intellectual discipline that looks man's existence from a critical perspective. Right? अब ये जो critical perspective है, that has changed from thinkers. A set of thinkers will view differently, another set of thinkers will view differently. Yes? So political theory is this intellectual tradition, right? So just a couple of keywords I'm writing here. In fact, ये वाला quotation, if you see the crash course lectures also, I've already told you this. ठीक है? You have seen crash course के lectures देख रहे हो आप? ठीक है? So it is an intellectual tradition, yes, which looks man's existence from a critical perspective. And to do that, there are certain approaches, because you have to connect the question. The question says the evolution of approaches. Okay? So of course, yes, there have been many approaches which have done this. Right? And with this, when I mention this, so I've already introduced, because the main core demand is the study of political theory, and to study them there are various approaches, and these approaches have evolved over a period of time. Okay? So here when I talk to you about the approaches, I have the, for example, the two predominant approaches. I have the normative approach. I also have empirical. What is normative approach? Value based है, ठीक है? Whereas empirical would be value neutral. Okay? Empirical approach will be fact based, it will be observation based. Normative approach will tell us what ought to be. Empirical approach will tell us what is. Okay? Any thinkers with respect to these two? Yes, Socrates, Plato, etc. are known for normative approach. Okay? Whereas if I go to empirical approach, what thinkers come to mind? At least we can say Machiavelli, even Hobbes. Okay? So even, yes, Locke said mind is a tabula rasa. Okay? So that is how, and the question says the evolution of this approach. So the approach starts with the work of Plato, for example, but later on, even in Hegel, we see the evolution of normative approach. Hegel says state is the march of God on earth. Even later on, by the way, you have Leo Strauss, you have Rawls. Rawls in his book A Theory of Justice 1971 again revives normative approach. Yes? So the point here is, in this question again there is normative approach, you have to talk about it, there is empirical approach. In fact, it is the empirical approach which will criticize the normative approach, especially during the works of David Easton. तो इस क्वेश्चन में, while it is not explicitly mentioned, this question में you can also address the at least a mini demand of decline of political theory, right? Because empirical approach which was there in the initial part will get revived, especially during the decline of political theory, right? Which is why David Easton will criticize normative approach for its, let's say, hyper factualism. Yes or no? Yes, historicism. So there are actually 4, in fact, in your model, the practice questions maybe. We've also seen that. Acha, how many of you is also writing the practice questions? देख रहे हो? अच्छा ठीक है, but you can again almost हर एक topic पे you'll get at least 5 questions, covering almost all the diversity. ठीक है? So again the flow for the people, again there are some of you who have joined in new. I think after the first question I'll tell you again the flow of how to follow the course etc. Okay. थोड़ा सा आइडिया समझ में आ रहा है इसको अप्रोच कैसे करना है इस क्वेश्चन को, बिकॉज आफ्टर दैट आई विल आल्सो टेल यू सम अदर पार्ट्स. देन हाउ टू कंक्लूड दिस क्वेश्चन, जैसे आपने बताया, एनी फ्रेमवर्क दैट यू कैन यूज हियर? हाँ, so see, for political theory can be too complex to be analyzed only from one approach, or I can say I need a mixture of both. I need values also, I need facts also, okay, which is what the post-behavioral revolution tried to reconcile. So when you end this question, in fact, इस question का जो core है, and the question that political theory is not dead, almost core दोनों का same है. Yes, in this question also, what we have to ultimately do is to have to talk about how you can reconcile all these things. So if I summarize, what you should have in the answer, you have to in the introduction define political theory, ठीक है? Mention its evolution, and in the evolution we'll cover the 3 stages, wherein you have normative stage, right, you have empirical stage, and you have the post behavioral stage. अब इसमें main जो difference आएगा वो यहां पे आएगा. You have to mention the key scholars, okay, the examples. So in this question I would prefer that at least David Easton का नाम जरूर होना चाहिए, because the decline of political theory, one of the strongest critique is given by David Easton, okay, that we should mention. Of course in the normative, the scholars that we have discussed, the old scholars bhi hone chahiye, and you should also remember the recent revival of normative. So we can mention Dante Germino, like all we have done in the class also. We can mention Leo Strauss and ultimately John Rawls. That also shows how both these things can be combined. So conclusion may ultimately you have to balance this. Now here also there is also one framework that we say, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. ठीक है? All the 3 are also covered as a part of this. ठीक है? So all the 3 are overall, let's say, covered here. So that is just one. So political theory, you have to mention its evolution, you have to understand how this goes along, the 3 different stages that are there, okay, and then overall a balanced synthesis. यहाँ तक approach समझ में आ रही है? ठीक है? And चलो ठीक है. So here I'll just tell you overall a couple of things. So when you are writing, maybe if you are writing it for the first time, you may still have some inertia. Right? इसीलिए to tackle the inertia, it is better that after every test you have been given practice questions along with their model answers. ठीक है? Now if you have limited time, उन questions को देखो and have been the habit of brainstorming it. Okay? Because see, your first stage here is not to write a perfect answer. That will come after some practice. But how to think about it, at least introduction क्या होना चाहिए? Conclusion में how to best reconcile things. Okay? So here practice questions will help you, right? So again I'll tell you, the students who have joined in later, the flow for you should be that, for example, for you the level 1 is to watch the lectures of the crash course. Now for each topic, as our topics have proceeded, this you should see. This should be followed by the level 2, which I mean the practice questions, right? And when you do this, you should also try to summarize your notes. अब थोड़ा सा idea लग रहा है how to summarize, okay? So crash course lectures will help you do that. You will summarize and do this. And after some of the topics are done, when you do the final test, फिर आप अपनी practice करो यहाँ पे आके, okay? That when you write the proper test. Now even when writing the test, how much time did it take for you to write the test? कितना time? अच्छा 2.5 hours. ठीक है, ठीक है, first time है. तो अभी this is a concern I also knew would come. So right now, please remember, time should be the last concern for you. Time ज़्यादा भी लग रहा है, it is fine, but because many of you will be writing for the very first time, ठीक है? So time, even if it is more, just be aware how much time you are using, okay? With subsequent tests, your time will come down. क्यों? क्योंकि आपका revision better होगा, the thinking patterns, because then you will know, अच्छा यहाँ पे मुझे ऐसे criticize करना है. This is also where I have to add a scholar, etc. This is how I have to do that. Fine. So time will eventually come down. In fact, time should be our concern between prelims and mains. उसके पहले तक बहुत practice हो गई होगी. Then you remember the content. Then you know how to reproduce it. Then you can work on it. So right now our focus is on constructing the answers, focusing more on the value addition and our quality of answers. When that is sorted, then we can also talk about the time aspect. ठीक है? If that is a concern for any of you. Okay, so that being the very first question. Okay. Now this is a topic directly mentioned in our syllabus. Okay? Theories of justice are attempts to reconcile equality with liberty. Examine this statement in the context of Rawls' theory of justice and its communitarian critiques. Okay? अब इसको देखते हैं पहले पार्ट को. Theories of justice are an attempts to reconcile equality with liberty. Okay? Can you explain to me what this statement says? अगर ये सिर्फ इतना क्वेश्चन होता, the theories of justice are an attempt to reconcile equality with liberty, what would you think about it? नहीं, चलो lexical order तो तब आप सोचोगे when the question says Rawls, right? Imagine if this is the only quote that is given to you. What is your thought process? How would you think about it? Question: theories of justice are attempts to reconcile equality with liberty, right? We have seen, देखो, equality is also a topic. Equality is a contested concept, right? And equality and liberty are always at crossroads. If you give too much of liberty, it means equality can be in danger. If you go for too much of equality, that means liberty can also be conflicted. With this tension is best explained in the debate between liberalism and socialism. Liberalism tries to maximize liberty and socialism tries to maximize equality. Right? And I'm talking of the initial strands of liberalism. अब liberalism के बाद, of course, after classical liberalism, we see the rise of positive liberalism. क्यों? Because socialism criticized liberalism. Right? So you have positive. Later, positive liberalism led to the rise of welfare states. But even that was criticized by neoliberals. अब neoliberals क्या कहेंगे? Maximize equality. Okay? Nozick or Hayek will say that planning is a road to serfdom. Okay? So they are very critical of any attempts to go for equality. तो इसीलिए अगर आप देखोगे ना theory of justice, because see, अगर मैंने neoliberals की बात करी, we have Nozick for example. So Nozick has given the entitlement theory of justice. That's a different theory of justice. Rawls has given a different theory of justice. So different people and different scholars have given different theories and they try to reconcile equality and liberty. तो पहले let's understand what the statement says. Even this quote can be a question for you. वो तो उसका second part at least helps you in the context of Rawls. Of course, when I say Rawls, I have to talk about lexical order. I will talk about difference principle, etc. But पहले इसको समझेंगे. That these theories of justice are attempts to reconcile equality and liberty. Are we clear till here? पहले समझ में आ रहा है? इस क्वेश्चन को just you try to do it on the spot. People online can also comment. इसको बस introduce कैसे करोगे? How will you introduce this question? And let's try to introduce in two ways. Okay? एक, let's try to introduce using justice, and one we'll try to introduce using Rawls. दो तरह से करेंगे introduce. Try करो. Because again, you can have various way to approach a question. इसको सोचो. मे बी अगर इफ यू नॉट एबल टू थिंक एग्जैक्ट लाइंस, जो भी अप्रोक्सीमेशन है वो आप डिस्कस करो, आई टेल यू कैसे करना है. देखो क्वेश्चन को ना 2-3 तरह से हम ओपन कर सकते हैं हमेशा. सिमिलरली हम कंक्लूड भी अलग अलग तरह से कर सकते हैं. Anybody online who wants to write, you have been mentioned that you can do so. ओके देखो ना, बैठो बैठो. Rawls was a social liberal. In his theory of justice, he attempts to reconcile equality with liberty. ठीक है, fair. And next is equality and liberty is a contested theory for long. However, scholars have a different perspective to reconcile it. ठीक है. But देखो second question में you've talked about the debate, but that should have been about justice. Second में justice नहीं आया. Justice आना चाहिए था. ठीक है. देखो, if I talk about justice, okay, तो if I just use this, because the question is over, see, ये question basically है justice पे, about Rawls theory of justice, and a general statement is given about theory of justice. Okay, so you take justice, okay, or you can mention that justice is a contested concept. Here justice is a evolutionary concept which tries to reconcile the fundamental differences between equality and liberty, something of that sort. And then there is a similar question number 8 देखो एक बार अपने टेस्ट में Rawls पे. Question number 8 also tells that justice is the first virtue of a social institution. Yes or no? I can also use that quote to also start this question. अगर हम बात करें आगे, justice is the first virtue of social institutions as truth is the system of thought. If you understand question number 2 well, you will also understand this question well. Okay? So I can either use that, क्योंकि question क्या है, main core demand of the question is about justice. ठीक है. Second, I can also start with Rawls. Okay, and then you can mention Rawls' book. In his book, A Theory of Justice, right? He tries to give a grand theory of justice, right? Which tries to find a middle way, or which tries to resolve the differences between equality and liberty. And then you can directly segue. तो ये क्वेश्चन चाहे आप जस्टिस से स्टार्ट करो, थ्योरी ऑफ जस्टिस से, और ओवरऑल रॉल्स वर्क, रॉल्स थ्योरी ऑफ जस्टिस, यू कैन डू सो. Right? So that is how you can begin this question. Now if I have to examine this, that these are attempts to reconcile equality with liberty. Okay, so here you will talk about, देखो अब Rawls, if you have to write any question, say Rawls पे लिखोगे, तो you have to have some keywords in this answer, right? So when I say Rawls theory of justice, so पहले तो I'll mention his book. Some things you will always remember. I will also mention influences on Rawls. And then I'll also write the keywords associated with this theory. This is the best way for the examiner to know whether I am addressing the core demand of the question. ठीक है? What is the name of the book? A Theory of Justice, 1971. Who are the influences on Rawls? Right from Plato, you have the influence of Locke, John Locke, and even Immanuel Kant. ठीक है? Then his, मैंने keywords लिखे. अब keywords में I'll tell you what are the keywords you can also write here in the question. देखो, Rawls theory of justice में क्या keywords होंगे आप बताओ. ठीक है, good, और yes, yes, veil of ignorance, okay. And we know that his theory is it's a procedural theory, right? In his theory, in a procedural theory, he tries to put people in a original position under veil of ignorance, right? And while talking about it, then you have to talk about he has a, or he tries to give a lexical order in which he arranges the values, and in that the highest value is given to liberty, followed by equality, and then there is a difference principle. And jo abhi to, because it's a 10 marker, you have to also explain these terms. You don't have to go for explanation of veil of ignorance, etc., but you definitely should explain what is the lexical order in which, देखो Rawls के लिए अब आप सोचो, in classical liberalism or even in neoliberalism, they are giving maximum liberty, but maximum liberty is not leading to equality. तो वहां पे ultimately क्या है? Injustice है. How does he reconcile it? He talks about things like progressive taxation, affirmative action, ठीक है? तो यहाँ पे we have to talk about difference principle, right? In this question, then very smartly, when you see in the context of Rawls and its communitarian critique, this is explicit in the question. So you know it's a 10 marker. I'll also tell you visually how to at least think about it. Let's say this is your 10 marker, में you have 2 pages, right? आपको ऐसे लिखना होगा. And slowly, steadily, this practice you should also do. See, this is 150 words. Okay? By and large, maybe your 150 words almost end here. Don't overwrite. 10-15 words ऊपर नीचे चलता है, ठीक है? But more than that, so let's say this question is mentioned here. This is your introduction. Maybe you have taken something like this. Okay? Just, and you keep on changing the paragraph. Now in the body, you don't, हाँ, तो यहाँ पे Rawls की book and his influences, you've just mentioned it. Then you talk about the core ideas related to Rawls. Fine. So you will mention this, perhaps in 3 or 4 or 5 lines. Directly jump to communitarian critique here, because this also has to be highlighted, let's say, and then overall conclude it. So visually, so this will tell you that you don't have too much of scope to over elaborate. हाँ, अगर 20 marker होता, then our approach would have been different, because then we have to explain a lot. In this question, some people can also make the mistake. They keep on writing about Rawls theory till here, and last में फिर याद आएगा communitarian critique भी तो है. Okay, so which is why right now you have to see where, because ultimately you have to just use 2 pages, and if you have a small font, you are writing around 1/3 or 1/4 of, let's say 3/4 of a page, right? So you have to be very smart in this sense. Don't overemphasize any section. Is that fine? Okay. So let's go back, right? So you have examined this question, and that is how he tries to reconcile. In fact, that is why his theory of justice is known to be one of the biggest works of justice. Okay, before him, there was no grand theory of justice which tries to reconcile the debate between equality and liberty. Okay, now in the communitarian critique, अब आप बताओ, which people will we quote? आप बताओ, अभी याद है? नहीं? चलो, Michael Sandel, Michael Walzer, I can say Charles Taylor. These are very prominent people. And what is the core critique of communitarians? Bilkul. And because for communitarians, community is very important. Man is not isolated. Man is a part of the community. Everything is contextual, not individualistic. Okay? So that is what they will criticize Rawls' theory as. Okay? So for example, when I have Michael Sandel, okay, Liberalism and the Limits of Justice is the book. He argues, Rawls, unencumbered self is what? Abstract. Individuals are embedded in the communities. ये आप बहुत बार पढ़ चुके होंगे, ठीक है? In case somebody has not yet covered it, again please go back. These lectures etc. are present in your portal. Please go back and see. ठीक है? So what does he talk about? It is very abstract. Okay? Individuals are embedded in these customs and traditions. I can also include Michael Walzer. But यहाँ पे इतना scope नहीं है आपके पास. Okay? Because you have to cover everything in just 150 words. Okay? Same thing, Charles Taylor. And Charles Taylor is sometimes known to be the father of communitarianism. Okay? Excessive focus on individual rights ignores cultural identity and recognition. This is also something we can say, right? So फिर क्या है finally? That Rawls prioritizes liberty and equality in a universal way, decontextualized way. This is why he will be criticized. Communitarians will say there can be no universalized conception. Okay? Walzer will say, bhai, there are different people with different demands. Okay? So you cannot homogenize everything. Okay? Ignoring the communitarian क्या बोलेंगे? What is belonging, identity, different traditions are there. Okay? How would you end this question? So you know what is a communitarian critique. अब इसको end कैसे करोगे? इस question को? हाँ, good. So because this question is specific to Rawls, in the context of Rawls, you can also say that Rawls revises this thing or his theory. Yes. In his second book, Political Liberalism, he revises this and incorporates some of the criticisms and he revises his work. That can be one way. Okay? Or then you can say, or maybe if you don't remember that criticism, then you can again say that Rawls' work has been fundamental in trying to reconcile the differences between liberty and equality. Okay? And new developments are still being made in the field. Because after Rawls, Amartya Sen, Martha Nussbaum, there are more scholars who are trying to address the gap of liberty with equality. Yes? So, इसीलिए in our syllabus also, all these topics are related. Justice is related to liberty, is related to equality, is related to, सब related है. So in the second test also, you will see a lot of topics which you can very well understand. Is this clear? So conclusion also, तो अभी यहाँ पे, what are the main things that you should have written is what I wanted to discuss with you. Okay. Critically examine the main ideas of post-colonial theory of state. This should have not been difficult. अब देखो क्वेश्चन क्या कह रहा है? Critically we have to examine, which means here how should you think? You have to have an introduction. Now in the body, I'll divide the body in some parts. See, if there is if you have to write about any theory of state, you have to mention its key people, key exponents, and their key ideas. Because the question says critically examine, अगर वो नहीं भी बोलता, we should have had still written, and then conclusion. Right? So these dimensions should be addressed. The question is post-colonial theory of state. How will you introduce this? कैसे करोगे इसको introduce? याद है? अच्छा, okay. चलो, Edward said से आप start करना चाह रहे हो? If you remember the quote, yes, you can do so. Anything else? You can also give the background that the existing, or you can mention that the state has been analyzed from multiple perspectives and a new emerging perspective is the post-colonial perspective. Then you have to mention why did the post-colonial perspective arise? क्यों? Because the existing perspective were not enough. Because the existing perspective were the dominant perspectives. They were Eurocentric. They were the perspective of colonizers. So which is why we needed new perspectives to answer this. Yes, can we say this? So either you use a prominent post-colonial thinker, Edward Said or Franz Fanon, Nkrumah, these are prominent people. Okay? Or you mention it and then you mention why was this needed. The reason being the existing theories of state, let's say the liberal theory or the Marxist theory, they were Eurocentric. For them the West was the ideal type. They did not recognize or they could not understand or fundamentally explain how the newly, let's say, decolonized states were to be analyzed. So बहुत difference है. Okay? Now, who are the key exponents of this theory? अभी तो नाम सुने हमने. Edward Said, ठीक है, और Hamza Alvi, ठीक है, he's a structural, post-structural Marxist, yes. पार्था चैटर्जी हैं, नक्रूमा, गायत्री स्पिवाक, काफी नाम हमने देखे हुए हैं, ठीक है. अब बताओ what are the main ideas of a post-colonial theory of state? What are their main ideas? Bilkul right. So of course they will talk about legacy of colonialism. They will talk about the extractive nature and you can give the works. For example, यहाँ पे there are multiple theories. जैसे F.W. Riggs talk about prismatic society. हाँ बिल्कुल, yes, yes, yes. So through key ideas I can also mention, okay. Dependency theory है. अब इसे dependency theory is of course again a Marxist analysis. That is also a post-colonial view, okay. Or when we say Hamza Alawi's overdeveloped state, what is overdeveloped state? The political structures are, yes, yes, because those structures have been inherited, right? So political structures are far more developed, the state is very powerful, but that is not matched by equal levels of economic development. That creates a gap. That becomes overdeveloped state, yes? Huh. So these are the few points that you will have to mention here. Anything else that comes to mind? What you can mention? While explaining this, again I know it's a 10 marker, बहुत scope नहीं है, because यहाँ पे भी this is an equally important point, criticism, right? How many of you can tell me the criticism of post-colonial state? चलो मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ that they for example they criticized Eurocentric theories but they adopted them as well. Whatever ideal type, जैसे democracy है, जो भी values हैं in the Eurocentric part, they adopted the very same thing they are criticizing. Second thing, they did not acknowledge the positive role of some of the colonial development. Not everything was negative, something was positive, but they did not agree to that, okay. So specifically, because in this question I know body में आपको इतनी problem नहीं होगी, main issue होगा at least some solid points यहाँ पे होनी चाहिए, ठीक है. So यहाँ पे I'll tell you a couple of points. There is over emphasis on colonial legacy. So their own internal dynamics have not been accounted for. Same thing if you see Indian national movement or in general India. So even before India there were some problems which were internally happening, but everything that you read in general is that everything has or is related to it is a British problem. So that is overemphasis on colonial legacy, one, right? It is too focused on domination and exploitation, and it neglects the achievement of democratic consolidation. Let's say, for example, 1947 we got independent, right? So all these parts, India and South Asia, Africa mein, this democratic consolidation etc. is not given too much of weightage, but focus is only on domination and exploitation. That is also criticism, right? Then generalize all these post-colonial states. Ab bhai, point hai, isme bhi in these states there is a variation. We already know there are failed states, there are also successful democracies, although you can say successful democracies are very limited. There is the rise of military coup, okay? But overall, here also, koi bhi theory hai, if it tries to homogenize everything, is also going to face some challenges. That is also an issue here. Okay? So criticism of the post-colonial theory is also what we need to know. How would you then conclude this? देखो critical examine तो कर लिया हमने, but उसको how would we conclude it? Like for example, अब देखो आप ये भी बता सकते हैं, देखो you have to talk about some relevance only the last part. जैसे the post-colonial theory, like you mentioned, is helpful in understanding neo-colonialism, is helpful in understanding the new forms of development that are there, right? So exploitation that is happening has taken new forms. अब जैसे the rise of digital colonialism or new colonialism, that can be one part, okay? Or overall, You can also mention, despite the challenges or criticisms, post-colonial theory offers a new way or insights into understanding the new decolonized states. तो जब कुछ समझ में नहीं आए तो सबसे सिंपल है, write despite criticism and give its point. And if you know specific points, then you can mention that also. ठीक है, बट इस अगेन अभी मेरा फोकस है अगेन आप लोग के लिए भी, यू शुड बी एड्रेसिंग ऑल द पार्ट्स. ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए you do focus too much on the body, you miss out. In this question itself says critically examine, so you have to have this part of criticism. Okay, and exactly like we followed here, this is the split, this is the challenging part, right? Because sometimes you know too much on a topic, in the body you'll try to elaborate it more, but then if your criticism and the conclusion is lacking or missing, you will miss out on the points. आप इसको ऐसे just imagine, examiner is going to mark you on all these buckets. हर bucket के कोई marks हैं, तो ऐसा नहीं है कि in this bucket if you feel too much you'll get extra marks for this and this also. नहीं, only if you address all the 4 dimensions, then you would be getting all the relevant sub parts and the sub marks. ठीक है, okay. Okay, explain the central ideas. Almost similar type of question है जो अभी हमने देखा, just that now the question and these topics are directly from the syllabus. Pluralist theory, okay, post-colonial, all these are there. Central ideas, we have to talk about pluralist theory of state and evaluate its strength and limitations. I'm here in the body, we'll also talk about the strengths, so which is why limitations or criticism I'm writing here. Okay, how would you start this question? अच्छा देखो, अगर क्वेश्चन theories of state पे है, if the question is on theories of state, and please note if it is a 20 marker, if it is a 20 marker, you can also start with state. Many students also write, if you see many topper copies, right? Political science or political theory starts or ends or begins with state. Okay, Garner, all these statements. State से start करना is better if it is a 20 marker. Okay, if it is a 10 marker and the question is very specific to a theory, जैसे in this case the question is specific to the pluralist theory of state, because you are short on words, it is better you start directly from this. Or you can also start pluralist theory emerged or came in the context or as a criticism of the monist theory of state. Okay, that is more specific. But if you've seen copies writing state से शुरू करेंगे, so they will mention what is a state, then they will mention state has been analyzed from theories and one of the theories is pluralist theories, फिर वो start करेंगे. That is better for a 20 marker, because in 20 marker you have 4 pages. Okay, and this is also a question I often get कि सर अगर theories of state पे अगर question है, should I start from state or should I start from it? It depends on how many marks the question is and which dimension is being asked. Okay, गलत नहीं है, this is not wrong, but आप suppose करो, if you start with what is a state, there are multiple theories of state, in that one theory is pluralist theory, and then you start with pluralist theory, you ultimately only have 2 pages, and in this question strengths भी बताना है, limitation बताने हैं, उसके बारे में everything has to be there, so everything should be addressed. You don't have to go in too much of detail. इसीलिए I'm telling you, every type of question needs a specific kind of skill. 10 markers for some of you is easy to write because you can elaborate on it, but कुछ लोग struggle करते हैं 15 or 20 markers में, तो that also depends. Okay, fine. All right, so let's begin to discuss this. So directly, if you want, you can talk about pluralist theory of state. What is the core argument of pluralist? And acha, just let's discuss this. What is, first of all, what is monist theory of state? Monistic or monistic theory of sovereignty, for example. Power centralized, and there is only one. Okay, entire power lies with the state. Okay, right, and that is given by monistic theory. Who are the key people? जीन बॉर्डन, ऑस्टिन, even Hobbes, ठीक है, Austin, Hobbes, Borden, etc. These are proponents of this monistic. Pluralistic theory simply says that there is no one association, there is plurality of associations. Okay, so every association has power. State cannot say, and basically terms like state commands because it serves. Okay, now that is one. So pluralist theory will talk about plurality or multiple associations. State being one of those multiple associations, okay, which is why the power gets bifurcated, okay, distributed. That is one. Who are the core proponents of pluralist theory of state? किसने बात करी? Lasky, okay, even McIntyre I can say, then McIver, so both of them basically argued that there are multiple associations, right? No, but Kiblika is there for multiculturalism. That is different. Pluralist is different. Okay. So McIver for us and Lasky are prominent figures. GDH Cole etc. हम बात कर सकते हैं later on also. हाँ, Dehel, yes. Dehel also talks about polyarchy. And later he changed his views to deformed polyarchy. Polyarchy is also saying the same thing, okay? And when we say Robert Dahl, he criticized C. Wright Mills, okay? Earlier view was again same thing. Mills was saying all the power is there with the elites. Robert Dahl basically said it is not with the elites, but there are multiple institutions who hold power. Fine. So the main idea of this theory is we will talk about that there are multiple nodes or associations which hold power. State commands because it serves, and you can use their core ideas to explain it further. Okay. So McIver and be Lasky, be Robert Dahl, all of them. So this question you have to mention their names also, their theories also, right? And through that you will tell the ideas of a pluralist theory of state. Is that fine? Then what is the limitation? Acha, what is the strength of their theories? हाँ देखो strengths में हम दो चीजें बोल सकते हैं. हाँ, strength में that number one, because of this, okay, at least power. See, C. Wright Mills talks about power being with the elites, but through pluralist theory of state we say power is diffused. Power is present with other key, let's say, players also. One. Second, other than this, ठीक है, protect minority rights. So one is power. Second is that agency is not limited to the state. Agency is there with other associations also. So actually when I say strengths, strengths means this theory recognizes plurality of actors, right? And it goes beyond the traditional notion of state. That is the strength. But what is the limitation? Chalo, good point, very good point. That Marxist will simply say, or in this theory there is too much of emphasis on cooperation. Everybody will cooperate. That is not the reality. So Marxist will say there will be fight between different classes. Fair point. Or kuch? Anything else? आप ये सोचो, देखो सब the main criticism of the theory is that during the times of struggle or during the times of emergency, who is going to be the sovereign? If there are too many players, if the authority is not very clear, in the times of crisis there will be a failure. So it is said that their theory, especially in the times of crisis, is not able to answer all the questions. Okay, तो अब देखो कुछ चीजें देखते हैं. Okay, so one is it overemphasizes associations, underplays that state also tries to integrate everything. First challenge. Then पावर इनइक्वालिटीज हैं, बोलने को देयर आर एसोसिएशंस, बट सेम थिंग मोनिस्टिक थ्योरी आल्सो मेंशन, लीगल थ्योरी, दैट द मैक्सिमम पावर लाइज विद द सॉवरेन. अगर मान लीजिए 5 एक्टर्स हैं, हो सकता है स्टेट हैज 80% ऑफ द पावर, so you cannot say everybody has equal power, right? So not all groups have equal resources. Very important, ये अब आपका point है. Okay, Marxists argue pluralism ignores class domination, right, or class antagonism, we can say this. Now especially during the times of crisis, state is necessary and it is important for the state to assert its supremacy. Okay, pluralism looks unrealistic, right? It is too utopian for them. If there are too many players, if everybody wants to be the most important, then this concept is very ambiguous. This is going to make the state weak. इसलिए बोला भी जाता है in the times of crisis, and which is why this idea was also changed. Or that is why in fact you also say deformed polyarchy. What is the meaning of deformed polyarchy here? Polyarchy, you know, there are different players who have power. What is deformed? In deformed also, it simply means that ultimately the power lies with the elites. That is also how he changed his view. Okay, so today we saw John Rawls changing his view from a theory of justice to political liberalism. Similarly, even the views of this will change, right? And ambiguity is there with sovereignty. अब इसमें सारे points तो नहीं लिख पाओगे, at least 2-3 points you can write, right? It leaves unresolved who arbitrates conflicts between associations. सबसे ये भी issue है. If the associations are fighting with themselves, who is going to be arbitrating that conflict? Which is why the pluralist theory of state, it is why in fact this theory is also said to be very ambiguous. In fact, feminist theory of state is sometimes also said to be ambiguous. Why? You criticize the state, yet you expect the state to do everything. Okay, same for pluralist also. That is why it is said they want to eat the cake and yet have it also. दोनों कैसे कर पाओगे? या तो केक खा पाओगे या रख पाओगे. Okay, so same thing. Are we clear with the challenges here? Okay, now question number 5. Now you have your 15 markers which are starting. Acha, how many of you faced the challenge of writing 15 and 20 markers? Were you able to fill the pages? तो मुश्किल हुआ. ठीक है. 20 markers में generally people may have problems. Why? Your expression part है ना, elaboration part may not be very good. That for every idea you can expand to a paragraph. This will come with more practice and practice. ठीक है? Which is why again I'm asking you, जो भी practice questions हैं, देखो, you are doing the class, you do the practice questions and then you attempt the test. In between also revise. How would you revise? Make summaries. किसी ने बनाई summaries अभी? बनाएंगे? अब दिखाना क्लास के बाद अभी. ठीक है, मॉल दिखा देना. ठीक है, ओके. चलो इसको देखो. अब if you have understood question number 1 well, ये question अब आसान है. The question says political theory is not dead, it has merely changed its form. Now the content of the question will also help you understand. ऐसा question आपको मिल सकता है उल्टा. If I give to you a statement, political theory is dead, comment. सोचो क्या बोलोगे? देखो अब, because we are starting quote based questions, there are few things I'll tell you. Okay, whatever is the quote, comment, elaborate, etc. Let's say for example I say political theory is dead. Our question said it is not dead, right? देखो कोई भी क्वेश्चन होगा अगर quote based है, normally they will only write the quote and they'll stop. इसमें भी you have to mostly first tell why this appears to be true. That why do you think political theory is dead or not dead depending on the question. But always you can counter it. That this statement gives you only limited understanding. This does not give you complete understanding. कह सकते हैं ऐसे? ठीक है? So my point is whenever a quote based question is there, आपको लगेगा जैसे क्वेश्चन है फेमिनिस्ट थ्योरी पे, कुछ भी अगर सिर्फ कोट दिया होगा, So here still you have to present a holistic perspective. By that what I mean, let's say the question is on feminist theory, anything, okay, same format rahega hamara. We have to think of the introduction, body. In the body, try to include the scholars, their work, their ideas, significance, everything. Then talk about criticism, and then the way forward or the conclusion. Even if it's a small quote and yet nothing much has been mentioned. Because here, if you only include the body part, your marks may still get cut in the criticism. Because this is the most comprehensive way to write an answer. You have included every dimension. क्योंकि explicit तो था नहीं, तो examiner आपके marks फिर नहीं काटेंगे. Yes or no? So if the question is जो भी quote है, first part of your answer should reflect why the quote appears to be true. Then only later perspective should be there. Sometimes अब इसीलिए don't start directly refuting it कि भाई ये statement ही गलत है. That is not how we'll write it. In this, the best way is define political theory. You can do so, and then address why it appears to be dead. As simple as that. And then counter क्या होगा भाई, why is it not dead? Which means you have to talk about revival of political theory. Yes. चलो, if that is clear. And quote based questions में it sometimes, अच्छा, one more thing, in some questions जैसे scholar का नाम mentioned है, but if it is not mentioned, you don't have to be under pressure कि I have not heard who this scholar is. The very next question on feminism or feminist theory is a quote by Catherine McKinnon. But हो सकता है आपको नहीं पता हो किसने quote दिया. Then based on the basic general understanding, write the answer. Right? Even if you did not know the quote is by Lenin, but if you read the quote, you would still write approximately the same things. Yes? ठीक है, अब आते हैं इस पे. It is not dead, it has merely changed its form. Fine. So of course we will give an introduction of political theory, and which also means you prepare your introduction on this political theory को prepare कर लो. ठीक है? आते हैं. Very quickly I'll go through what should be the points here. Why was this considered dead? ऐसा क्यों था? Right? Specifically because of the rise of positivism and behavioralism. Yes? Focus shifted from normative to empirical facts. Okay? Reducing the scope for normative speculation. That is one reason. Right? And specifically, the old normative theories were not able to explain World War II and the aftermath, the rise of fascism, the rise of new events. Okay? So liberalism, etc. So main thing is ideological exhaustion happened, and then again it was said to be not explanatory. And David Easton very specifically, okay, talked about issues like hyper-factualism. They say, see, decline of political theory happened in how many phases? At least 2 phases. 2 phases. कैसे? How? Huh? Yes. So first, during the rise, first of all, the decline of normative approach happened. That is the first decline. After that, what came? Behavioral revolution. Even that led to, yes. So then David Easton also mentioned that people sitting in ivory towers, perfecting their technique, which is why he said the demand for credo of relevance. Right? So when we say why was political theory considered dead, you will write these points. Okay? That political theory was not able to explain the causal phenomena. It was not able to be relevant. It was speculative. It was value based. It was not neutral in that sense. It could not be verified, etc. And you will mention it through the works of Easton. Any other person who has criticized this? बहुत हैं वैसे. Decline of political theory पे? बिल्कुल बिल्कुल. Germino will talk about issues of behavioralism. That excessive focus on facts also leads to challenges. Okay? अब that is true. Second part पे आप पहले बताओ, what would you think about it? How does it seem that it has changed its form? It is not dead. It has merely changed its form. Just try to think. Good point. That means you are saying suppose behavioralism has linked data and values, facts and values together. It has resolved the fact-value dichotomy. 1 point. और सोचो. How has it changed its form? Don't you see the rise of new approaches? Right? Good, green, which means the ecological theories, the rise of feminist theories, the rise of post-colonial theories, the rise of critical school, right? Social movements, and overall the scope of the discipline has changed and it has expanded. Earlier क्या होता था? The study only of constitutions was happening, legal institutional approach, historical approach, philosophical approach. Now the scope has changed. ठीक है? ये question बताएं क्या है? This question is also comment on the nature and scope of political science. So scope in the recent times has expanded. The nature has also transformed. Earlier the nature was value laden. Now the nature is value free, but both things have been matched. Okay? So when you see this question, कहीं पे इसके ऊपर लिख भी लेना, this question is nothing but nature and scope of political science. These are different ways. Many students actually get confused in political theory. Political theory में बहुत तरह के क्वेश्चन बन जाते हैं. ठीक है? That is one. Now, why it is not dead? क्यों नहीं है? First, we already discussed, is the rise of post-behavioralism, right? David Easton, credo of relevance. Okay? He revived normative theory. First. Second, critical theory. अब इसमें some of these things you already know. Habermas. Anybody who has heard the name of Habermas? कहाँ पे सुना? किसी theory से link करो. If you remember. चलो, legitimation crisis किसने बताया? हाँ? ठीक है, तो याद रखो. He also talked about deliberative democracy, right? Feminist political theory. So Carol Pateman, सुना होगा नाम आपने. You must have. Okay, Catherine McKinnon. Gendered nature. So point is there is a evolution happening. So my question is the nature as well as the scope of political science is increasing and transforming, right? So feminist political theory है. Post-colonial approaches, right? Ranjit Guha, Partha Chatterjee, subaltern perspective, etc. So we've already seen some important names like Edward Said, Nkrumah, okay, Gayatri Spivak. Green theory. Give me any one scholar very prominent for this. Vandana Shiva. याद आ रहा है? हाँ? Vandana Shiva, you will also see in paper 1B and also paper 2A. Okay, very prominent. Okay, global. So there are debates of global justice, cosmopolitan. Martha Nussbaum and Amartya Sen. These are having similar views. Okay, David Held in the theory of democracy we also read about. So these are some points that we generally see. ठीक है? अब बताओ क्वेश्चन समझ में आ रहा है? Evaluate this statement, right? How will you conclude this statement? I am giving you 30 seconds. सोचो. Conclude कैसे करोगे? आपने पार्ट एड्रेस कर दिए from the headings. How would you conclude this? Try to think. How would you conclude? Try karo. Both of you have to try. You also try. Try करोगे? बताओ. Thinking? Are you thinking? Okay. And here also please remember there is no correct way. Multiple points हो सकते हैं. And with some time in my discussions I always ask you and put you in a spot asking कैसे करोगे. If you follow this, after some time it will become natural, automatic. चलो एसेंस क्या होगा आपकी कंक्लूजन का, वो बताओ चलो. नहीं नहीं, ये तो फिर डिस्क्रिप्शन है. कंक्लूजन में एसेंस क्या होगा? यस, ओके. हाँ, but basically at least what you're trying to say is there has been an evolution, okay, that the nature and the scope of this political theory has transformed over a period of time. So a smarter way to conclude it is by this, I'll tell you. It has transformed from abstract speculation, that is what? Normative, to context sensitive critique, okay, and reconstruction. When I say reconstruction, just say, if I say post-colonial theory, what is that? Reconstruction of history. These, a lot of people, their voices have been excluded from the movements. So they want to bring that back. Yes or no? Can we say this? Okay, as Isaiah Berlin observed, political thought will remain vital as long as, अब देखो मैंने जैसे बताया, political theory is looking at man's existence from a critical perspective. Almost similar thing is this. Political thought is vital as long as societies confront conflicting values, and this conflict will always be there in the societies. In fact, Isaiah Berlin talks about value pluralism. Yes, we can talk about this as well, right? So now you are able to understand and consolidate this. Okay? Now, next move. State is nothing but an instrument of class domination. How would we write? Or a quote is about Lenin. So you tell me, this question is from which theory or which part of syllabus? Yes, Marxist theory of state. Right. Very good. Very good. When we do Marx, yeah, when we do theories of state, one of the theory of state is Marxist view. There are two theories basically. Instrumentalist, it means state is directly an instrument, yeah, from the executive committee of bourgeois, right? Second view is relative autonomy. Who popularized the relative autonomy view? और दोस्तों नहीं? हाँ चलो ठीक है. So there are two people. One, so they Ralph Miliband in case of instrumentalist, and Nicholas Poulantzas in case of relative autonomy. Okay, I will tell to you relative autonomy when I criticize the theory of this. Now, देखो state is nothing. देखो Lenin's view is inspired by Marx and Frederick Engels. In their book, again they wrote this Communist Manifesto. Previously Marx also wrote Das Kapital. Okay, so there the core view is that state is ultimately an instrument of the executive, or of the state is the executive instrument of the bourgeois. Fine. So I can bring that across. Then in this question I'll talk about how, what does Lenin say. In this question it is not mentioned, but I will also tell what is the strength, or how does Lenin's view improve our understanding. Because Lenin's view, by the way, please remember, जब हम बात करते हैं इसकी IPE, International Political Economy, then Lenin's view is very important. Lenin's theory also explains imperialism. Okay, in fact there is also a very famous quote that in the search for profits, okay, the bourgeois, they nestle everywhere and settle everywhere. Okay, all of that is nothing but an extension of Lenin's view. So that is there, but in this question you also have to talk about limitation. And by now you would have realized almost हर एक question में we are emphasizing on this. Limitation has to be mentioned properly. Yes or no? Okay? ठीक है. अब देखते हैं इसको. अब देखो Marx and Engels. देखो first is these are your scholars. Scholars should be there in the answer. This is of course the book. See, not everything you will be able to write in the very first go, which is why when you see the discussion, you get an understanding how your answer can be improved even more. ठीक है? और इसमें कोई ऐसी चीज नहीं है जो आपको नहीं पता होगी. But just that, how I am constructing the points in front of you and helping you understand, this will solidify your understanding. So ideally, it is always better to write the test and then see the discussion. Okay? But in case some of you may be short on time, so then of course you can find a workaround. अगर आपने discussion देखा, उसके बाद भी टेस्ट लिखा, ठीक है, it's fine. ठीक है? But सबसे highest impact के लिए, it is you follow the structure, see the write the test and then see the discussion. Okay, now, executive of the modern state is a committee for managing, this is what we saw. So Marx and Engels, they basically give what? Instrumentalist view. Okay, so they will talk about the instrumentalist view, right? Now, अब ये एक point many times we see, state is a product of irreconcilable class contradictions. What is the meaning of irreconcilable? बताओ. It simply means, you know what is to reconcile? What is reconcile? ठीक? Irreconcilable means these differences cannot be resolved. Can we say this? ठीक है? So state is a product of irreconcilable class contradictions. Okay? Then it's a coercive machinery, okay, which safeguards the private property and capitalist order. That is nothing but, that is how they are the instruments of the bourgeois class. Yes, can we say? Of course we can say this, right? So it is a coercive machinery, army, police and law, which safeguards private property and the capitalist order. ठीक है? Then Lenin. अब in case you remember, the name of the book is State and Revolution. अब यहाँ पे there are two keywords that you will see. He will talk about dictatorship of the proletariat. Okay, we know who are proletariat and bourgeois, right? And that is what that is leading to class contradictions, right? So basically he would say, to suppress the bourgeois, there should be dictatorship of proletariat, number one. And second very important keyword is withering away of the state. He also says this, right? State will wither away, slowly and steadily disappear ho jayega state. If that happens, that will lead to a classless communist society. Communist society was also Marx's utopia, right? Classless society hai, and state will wither away. But the reality of this was, did the state wither away actually? Nahi. So that will be a limitation of his view, right? Are we able to understand till here? What was Lenin's contribution? Now, always whenever you talk about somebody's theory, also evaluate it. In evaluation, you will talk about the positives, yeah, strengths, yeah, contribution of that. And then you talk about its limitation and critiques, right? So when you are seeing this, अब आपको एक बड़े ordered तरीके में सोचने का पता चल रहा है ना, how to think and write actually. So Lenin's view is a critique of liberal claim that the state is neutral. And this claim they will always make, state is a neutral arbiter. They will say, nahi, state is not neutral. State is actually the instrument of the bourgeois class. Pehla point, right? Second, he also exposes structural inequalities in the formal democracy also, which means structural inequalities means the capitalists hold the power, economic base, and the capitalists or these people in power, they control everything. So it is not as if, what does democracy say? Everybody is equal, but they will say not everybody is equal. Why? Because the capitalist concerns are advocated and supported by the state. So they will expose the structural inequalities. And lastly, it helps to understand imperialism, colonialism, okay, because that is how the state is performing, which is why now if you see the statement, state is nothing but an instrument of class domination. Now are you understanding this? समझ में आ रहा है इसको? ठीक है? Now, what is the limitation? Right, is a reductionist view hai. This assumes that state has no authority of its own. Okay, state, it reduces state to an economic tool. It also ignores its relative autonomy, right? State's relative autonomy is ignored, which was again argued through the works of, let's say, Nikos Poulantzas. Then many states of also became authoritarian, right? There's no reason to believe that these states were very good. Second, the claim that the states will wither away was also not true. So historically seeing, this was also a challenge. Okay, so specifically if I mention withering away of state, this was also not seen. Last is the post-colonial critique. Okay, so here जो global south में states हैं etc., they are shaped by colonial legacies, and it is not just class structures, which is also why the Marxist theory of state is not helpful in explaining post-colonial societies. क्योंकि वहां पे क्या है, societies are prismatic. It is not just class. There is also, let's say, caste, religion, ethnicity, many other factors which are being in place. Right? How would you conclude this question? सोचो. Overall, you can give, जैसे अब इसमें if you've not mentioned this point, you can always mention that this theory was helpful in understanding the entrenched nature of imperialism, okay, or colonialism, etc. That you can mention. Balance, yes. Overall, the contribution of Marxist theory of this question is nothing. In this, you have to mention overall the contribution, overall assessment of Marxist theory, right? That despite its criticism, etc., that it still offers a valuable framework for analyzing the nature of state. Yes. Okay. पहले ये देखो, just see the quote. ये attempt किया आपने? What is the state? From women's point of view, the state is male in feminist sense. The law sees and treats women the same way men see and treat women. In your notes or in general, you would have also seen, whenever I look at the state, it appears male to me. Suna हमने? Okay. Critically examine this statement in the context of feminist theory of state. अब देखो क्या है, जैसे whatever quotes you are seeing in their test, उन quotes को separately please write them down somewhere. The same quotes can be used in some other answer also. Now, if I want to use a specific quote, I can also say this: the law sees and treats women the same way men see and treat women. Dash Catherine McKinnon. So I should be able to utilize whatever is there with me, right? I can say that. Now, feminist theory of state. How would you open this? नहीं, अगर अपने को पता है that this question statement is by a prominent thinker, we will mention that. So you can also introduce it by overall giving an introduction on feminist theory of state. Okay, and here because it's a 15 marker, you have some scope. You can also mention that the state has been analyzed from various perspectives. First off, the feminist perspective of state tries to give a gendered analysis. Okay, or it talks about the emancipation of women. That is the core concern for that state. Yes or no? Something on that front you can also do. Or this is the exact statement. So Catherine McKinnon famously observed this statement. Okay, feminist theory. अब ये challenge करता है किसको? अब ये important. Please also note, feminism as an ideology is also a topic that you do. Plus, we also do separately a feminist theory of state. So when I'm directly talking about this, see, just one point I'll make your point. You know what is this term? Radical. This is radical feminism. When we do Aurobindo Ghosh, and not Aurobindo, I say M.N. Roy. M.N. Roy gave the concept of radical humanism, right? He also criticizes the existing liberal and Marxist notion. In the same manner, radical feminists also don't accept liberal as well as Marxist, and they go beyond it. That is why the statements like personal is political come into being. Okay, so यहाँ पे what you have to mention and what you have to understand, they challenge the liberal and the Marxist assumption. Liberal के लिए क्या है, state is neutral. They also say that is not true. Second, a class-based state, that state is only there for the bourgeois. They say that this view is not reflective of the women understanding. Okay, state is deeply sustaining patriarchal power relations. Okay, so either if you know Catherine McKinnon, you can mention that, but core context क्या रहेगा इस सवाल का, that this theory of feminist theory of state challenges the existing understanding of the theory of state. Right? Now, in the context of this theory, ठीक है, what does the feminist theory of state tell you? First of all, tell me, what is the core argument? So few things we'll say. देखो, feminist theory of state, first of all, it criticizes the state. Now, of course, this criticism is different for different. So if there is, see, feminism also, there is liberal feminism, there is also socialist feminism, then there is radical feminism, there is black feminism, there is eco-feminism. Feminism has also seen various strands. Okay, but broadly speaking, जब आप देखोगे ना, the law sees and treats the women. So basically what they try to say, whatever laws are being created, they are created from a male lens. So the state is also a reflection, because see, who are creating the laws? Men, which also means parliament is dominated by men. So less female representation, and the laws are also not gender sensitive. That is the main criticism of the state. Fine. So here few things we will say, that this theory exposes the gender bias hidden in liberal neutrality and the Marxist focus. Okay. So there is a gender bias, the very first thing that they also speak about, number one. Second, structural and cultural patriarchy is also sustained through laws and policy. That they also bring in. Okay, and specifically this part here, just say in fact, if we see about the laws related to dowry in the Indian context also, or related to rape, or related to murder, etc. In many cases, abhi bhi the laws are not very much gender sensitive, and we're talking of overall globe. I can also give India specific examples here, right? So they will say that it is ultimately the patriarchy. That is why the statements were made. You could have also written here again things like, and the state is present in the public sphere also, and somehow the state is also there in personal sphere. So if I go and look into, let's say, laws like Domestic Violence Act, that's a law, but that law also promotes patriarchy, right? The wording, the phrasing, the punishments, etc. that are there are also seen to be looked from only the male perspective, right? Then it brings the lived experiences of women. That is the contribution of this theory. And it is always important to acknowledge the lived experiences. Lived means, bhai, jo, it is not किसी ने लिख दिया paper में. What you are experiencing, you are bringing them out. Which also tells that the laws are not reflective of the conditions of women. And the policies are not able to transform the lives of women. Why? Because they argue that these are written from a male perspective. Okay? So basically the feminist theory, or in this case the women's point of view, is largely missing. The women's perspective, we can argue, is largely missing. Second, what we can also say, the state is male. So again we can say, when I look at the state, it appears male to me. Why? Because the state's role in justice, the state's role in formulation of laws, policies, okay, it is not neutral and it is not class based as the Marxists say. So state is deeply patriarchal entity is what the criticism of feminist is, right? But is there any challenge to their view? Can we criticize the view? There is, yes, there is overgeneralization also. Second thing is in the same way, see, post-colonial view does not recognize the positives of the Eurocentric, or what the Britishers, or let's say the colonizers. Here in the same manner I can say, see, first is overgeneralization, okay, and it ignores the reforms made possible through the state intervention. Okay, even if you see right now, of course 1950s, 60s, 70s में जो state था laws का for women is far better that is there right now. Why? Because the state intervention has happened, legal proceedings and jurisprudence has changed. In Indian case also we see Article 19, Article 21 being constantly reformed as per, so right to marry, for example, the Hadia case, if you remember, right? Article 21 being constantly reformed. So abhi kya hai? Affirmative action for women, we can talk about Article 15, Article 16, CEDAW, okay? P compliance, this is again a convention related to women. Laws against domestic violence, prevention of sexual harassment at workplaces, let's say Indian case mein Vishakha guidelines. There is some work that is being done through state intervention, right? Second, the agency of women. Okay, so here in this case many times what happens, this view ignores how the women use the state as the site of resistance. So for example, if I take women's movement, okay, so a lot of women movement ultimately talk about the state should take an important role. So women are working to talk about the role of state. So we cannot say that state is always exploitative in nature. So the reformist role of the state cannot be ignored. Same point I can mention here. Okay, and then ये issue है feminist perspective maybe, and when there are multiple within feminist there are multiple perspectives, so sometimes that leads to confusion in what exactly you demand from a state. Okay, अब जैसे liberal feminist थे, okay, उनको लगता है state is reformable. In fact they actually initially argued the states for political rights. Okay, but radical feminists, they argue that entirely state as an institution is not correct. Okay, socialist feminists अब वो link करेंगे patriarchy to capitalism, that is again a different view. Radical feminists see patriarchy as universal. So within feminism also there are various strands, which is why sometimes the theory of feminism or the feminist theory of state is said to be ambiguous, not enough clarity, that on one end you criticize the state, but at the second hand you expect the state to have interventions. And let's say if the radical feminists, they do not expect the state, but then how would you have reforms, which is the important entity to ensure reforms? So in this question ultimately you have to talk about these dimensions also. Can we say this? Yes? All right, इसको conclude कैसे करोगे? जैसे what is the quote? And overall you can talk about overall contribution of feminist theory of justice, okay, or feminist theory of state, right? How they overcome or how they expose the limitations of the traditional understanding, right? Because feminist theory in general is a newer perspective to be had, so we'll mention that. Okay, okay. Now we move to the last two questions, which are the 20 markers. Okay, अब in 20 markers in both the questions we face challenges or in only any one? अच्छा लास्ट वाले में, ठीक है. इसमें तो देखते हैं, सी देखो, justice is the first virtue of social institutions as truth is of systems of thought. John Rawls. Examine this statement with reference to Rawls' principles of justice and their relevance in the 21st century. The moment question says relevance, what does it mean? नहीं वो तो सही है, बट इसको एक्सपैंड कैसे करोगे? एग्जाम्पल्स भी है, बट यहां पे भी सेम चीज, क्रिटिसिज्म, राइट? सो दिस क्वेश्चन में ऑटोमेटिकली एटलीस्ट 2 or 3 थिंग्स आई विल टेल एडिशनली इज द कम्युनिटेरियन critique, yes or no? I will also say what does Hayek and Nozick say? So communitarians, neoliberals, and I can even mention feminists. like Carol Pateman have been critical of John Rawls. And then I will give an overall conclusion. Okay, so we've broadly discussed about justice in the initial question also. So now I'll focus more on structuring of the question. Okay, in this question, how will you introduce question? कैसे करोगे? The quote is of John Rawls. So, and the quote is overall about his theory of justice. Okay, so you can directly start with John Rawls. Okay, how would you start? नहीं वो तो है ही, वो तो quote है. जैसे for example, you can mention, I can have 2-3 types of introduction. I can have a comparative introduction where I link. जैसे justice for Plato was architectonic. Similarly for Rawls it is the first virtue or the first system. I can use this, or I can talk how Rawls' theory of justice is one of the most important and valuable work of the 21st century. Why? I will use my knowledge of the previous question as it tries to reconcile what? Liberty and equality. तो यहाँ पे मैंने क्या करा? Liberty, equality. While, and I also mentioned his book while doing so. I mentioned how it is a very grand theory of justice, or it helps in the normative political theories revival. Yes or no? So I can talk about many things. Can I do so? So the point is, you should know how different ways to introduce the question. Now, justice is the first virtue of social institutions, as truth is of systems of thought. So basically he's saying truth is very important for any thinking, because if you have truth, then only the real values and the real things can appear. In the same way, justice कोई भी social institution है. That is why he gives a grand theory of justice, which is why his emphasis is on justice. So that is why it is the first virtue of social institutions. Okay. Now, in this, because the question says it is the first virtue of social institutions, in the body basically you have to first outline, because see, this is a 20 marker. अब यहाँ पे your description is very important. In 10 markers, examiner is basically seeing are you able to cover all the dimensions or not. In a 20 marker, अब यहाँ पे your apt use of keywords, elaboration, and here also if you are able to write in simple words with simple language with keywords. कोई जरूरी नहीं है कि आपने पूरी बुक रट रखी है ओपी गॉपा आपको एग्जैक्टली लाइंस लिखनी है, नहीं, नॉट नेसेसरी. यू अंडरस्टैंड द जिस्ट, बट यस जहां पे अब ओरिजिनल पोजीशन को यू कैन नॉट राइट इट एज, है ना, समथिंग एल्स. सो कीवर्ड्स हैव टू बी देयर, बट यस यू कैन राइट इट इन योर सिंपल वर्ड्स. नाउ इवन इफ यू सी द टॉपीज ऑफ द कॉपर्स राइट फ्रॉम टीना डाबी, okay, or other toppers, you would see that they use simple language also. It's not that everybody will use a very flowery language. तो यहाँ पे again, like we have done in the crash course lectures also, or whatever notes you are following, right? आपको कोशिश क्या करनी है, और इसमें logically लिखना है. One thing that will happen, this is a problem I am telling you at the outset, in 20 markers, because if you have not thought through, बहुत copies में क्या होगा, आपका second paragraph के points फिर repeat करते हैं fifth paragraph में. The same thing gets repeated. So sometimes the paragraphs get jumbled up. Does that happen? 20 marker में हो सकता है. क्यों? क्योंकि you have to have proper explanation. To solve this problem, you should be able to think from a question format. Right? First question I would want to ask, why there are so many people who give theory of justice. Why was Rawls interested in doing so? What was Rawls' motivation? What are his influences? That is my question. I will answer that question. Then I will answer what is his methodology. Then I will tell what are his theory. And then I will assess his theory. अब ये पूरा logical हो गया. One paragraph follows the other. So I am not digressing in that case. Right? So here I am just writing the hooks of how you can remember. So I've given, or I've mentioned what is his theory. Okay. So here one body में होना चाहिए भाई, what is his motivation? Why does he want to? Because his main concern was that even in the 21st century, justice or the theory of justice was not able to reconcile liberty and equality. There was so much of injustice going on, right? And to understand somebody's motivation, you also need to know their influences. So he was heavily impacted by Kant, Locke, and even works of Plato, right? And for him, because main concern kya hai, that he thought if the procedures to arrive at justice are perfect, because he wants to create a perfect theory of justice, then the outcome will also be perfect. That is why he has a contractual and procedural theory of justice. To give you a very simple example, आपने देखा होगा बहुत बार sports interviews में, be it Virat Kohli, MS Dhoni, they will simply say, if your process is fine, your outcome will be fine. Same thing he's also saying. So if the process to arrive at justice, and that is why he creates a universal process, true for everybody, then the outcome that will be derived will also be it will be just in nature. So please use these keywords, contractual, procedural theory that he uses. And in that, then we will use his keywords. Now he puts a person in a original position. What is original position? It is a hypothetical construct under veil of ignorance where people are unaware of how the goods etc. are going to be distributed, right? And through this he wants to create a universal theory of justice. In a theory in which if the procedures, so he expects and his people are rational in nature, they are cooperative. So again, his concern is if every institution is built on the foundational theory of justice, then the entire state will also be having theory of justice, which is what his core concern is getting reflected. So you'll mention that. Ab, isme of course, when you have mentioned motivation and influences is one. This has to be also explained अच्छे से, right? Procedural है, contractual है, original position. In the 10 marker, you are just dropping the names original position, veil of ignorance. In the 20 marker, you will explain them. Yes or no? This you can do so easily, right? Now, as you move forward, then you have to explain his theory of justice. And while explaining the theory of justice, now you can go in detail of लेक्सिकल ऑर्डर. इसी में ही आप बात करोगे फिर से डिफरेंस प्रिंसिपल. सो व्हाट यू आर नोटिसिंग हियर, यू आर कवरिंग एवरीथिंग रिलेटेड टू हिम, हिज मोटिवेशंस, हिज इन्फ्लुएंस, हिज theory related points, and then the specifics of it, right? So we are not ignoring anything. So when you've explained all these parts, what is difference principle? एक बार बताओ. That inequality can only be justified that, yes, in the benefit of the least advantaged sections. Any example of difference principle? Very good, very good. बिल्कुल affirmative action. ठीक है? Okay. Then the question asks us again, please go back. Rawls' principles of justice, yes, and its relevance in 21st century, right? So of course we will say that Rawls' theory of justice पूछा है relevance. Relevance also I will break it down into what will be the positives. Number one, अब बताएंगे progressive taxation, okay, affirmative action will reduce the inequalities which were also ushered through globalization, okay, or through the neoliberal state. His theory of justice is very transformative. Why? Because it reconciles liberty and equality. वरना बाकी सारी theories में this divide is always there. Either there is too much of focus on equality or there is too much of focus on liberty. We'll mention that, right? So relevance may we'll give this relevance, but at the same time I'll also mention the challenges. Okay, what would be the challenges? अभी तो देखा हमने ये सारे challenges. Challenges here is critique only. That his theory is criticized by communitarians, by neoliberals, by feminists, all of them. Now quickly tell me the critique of each one of them. What is the critique of by communitarians? Too much of focus on individuals. It is not focused on the community, number one. Second, unencumbered and embedded self. That is the point. Remember Michael Sandel, Michael Walzer, okay, Charles Taylor. What is the criticism of Nozick and Hayek? Very good. Social justice is a mirage. Planning is a road to serfdom. Then anything else in neoliberals? In fact, same thing. Just said Nozick in his theory of entitlement theory of justice. He simply says that state has no role in redistribution. Yes. Then and basically, see, they will simply say progressive taxation, etc., is bonded labor, right? All of this. The main concern for social or for neoliberals, Rawls attempt. So they will simply say that Rawls attempt to balance equality with liberty achieves neither. Neither is he achieving liberty nor is he achieving equality. So they are very critical of Rawls, neoliberals. What would feminists say? In fact, I can also add what will feminists say? The feminists or the Carol Pateman, they will say that in his idea, in his contract, in his original position, he does not take into account the case for women. Right? He simply assumes an individual. So in that sense, his theory is also male-centric, because specific focus to women is not mentioned in his theories. Can we say this? Right? Now, Amartya Sen say related, ek yaad rakhna. In the class also, I have also told you. Niti versus Nyaya debate. Niti is procedure. Nyaya is substance. So there are always two things that you will see. Procedure. The best way to understand this is, please remember, you know procedure established by law and due process of law. I can take this example. So procedure established by law. Now what if the procedure is not very good? It can lead to draconian laws. Remember Tada, Pota, etc. Substance means the actual substance of justice. So Amartya Sen says that Rawls focuses excessively on procedure, which leads to neglect of the substance. Then the same point he will make, that original position, veil of ignorance are very abstract topics, abstract concepts. Implementing them on ground, on reality is very difficult. Yes? So even this is also a challenge, right? So which is one point we can also mention here. So now are you able to understand the various critiques that he faces? That is very important to mention in the answer. Relevancy rahega, which is why his theory, he himself reformed his theory in the book Political Liberalism, right? And then of course he talks about overlapping consensus. He talks about that these principles should only be followed in the political sphere and not every sphere. Yes or no? That is what we can mention, right? Another way to talk about its relevance is that even now there are many groups who still feel injustice being done. Okay, so reconciling this, especially in the colonial or post-colonial societies, is very difficult, right? Because Rawls के case में social injustice नहीं बहुत बार, he does not talk much about social injustice. He talks about distribution of goods, but how to address the social inequalities, which is why communitarians will criticize him. Are we clear? Okay. Okay. Now let's see this last question. Compare and contrast the liberal and the Marxist theories of state. How relevant are these theories in explaining the role of the state in the 21st century? Dekho, role of the state in 21st century, these kind of questions generally are asked in paper 2A. Okay, but two years back in paper 1A also, a question ending with this, the role of state, neoliberal पे भी पूछा हुआ है. Okay, so by this question, I also want you to be prepared on the contemporary perspective of any question, right? अबे 20 मार्कर है, आप इस क्वेश्चन को स्टेट से स्टार्ट कर सकते हो, because this is a long question. You talk about what is a state, you mention how a state is analyzed from various approaches, the prominent approaches being liberal and मार्क्सिस्ट अप्रोच कह सकते हैं इसको, ठीक है. नाउ देन यू मूव इनटू लिबरल एंड द मार्क्सिस्ट थ्योरीज ऑफ स्टेट. नाउ कैन यू क्विकली टेल मी लिबरल थ्योरी ऑफ स्टेट एंड मार्क्सिस्ट थ्योरी? बताओ, हाउ विल यू कंपेयर देम? और उसके बाद हम जाएंगे रेलिवेंस में इनके. ठीक है, बट दैट इज ओनली वन पार्ट. ओके, दैट इज ओनली क्लासिकल. हाँ हाँ, राइट. देन यस, देखो जब लिबरल थ्योरी की बात करी गई है तो वी कैन टॉक अबाउट द डिफरेंट स्ट्रैंड्स, राइट. See, liberal theory of state, just quickly tell the keywords associated with it. What is the liberal theory of state? One is state is a neutral arbiter. Can we say? Yes, and night watchman. But night watchman होगा कि किस केस में? Classical theory में. Okay, night watchman is not in the case of the overall theory. Yes. Anything else? अच्छा, yes. Okay, laissez-faire. So you can either mention it from the view of classical liberalism. Overall, you will mention, see, in the liberal theory of state, autonomy is given to the individual with overall limited role for the state. But when you mention it, you will also mention that the role of state within liberal theory has evolved. For classical liberals, they talk about a night watchman state with laissez-faire. However, the positive liberals like T.H. Green look for positive interventions. They talk about positive liberty. Yes, welfare state. And the same thing again gets changed in neoliberal work. For the neoliberal, again, the state, and again with the rise of Reaganism, Thatcherism, there is a roll back of the state. Can we say this overall? So here, few things are: state is a neutral arbiter. This role is there. Now, what about Marxist theory? Right, and while talking about them, you will mention, so again, different, so again, Marx also, later Ralph. Nicholas Polanzas, that is TZAS. Okay. Now, what is the contrast from liberal and Marxist? Marxist will tell this is state is not neutral. Okay. They will give you a class-based analysis. So basically, they will say either the state is the executive committee of the bourgeois class, and even when they say state is relative autonomous, it is not totally autonomous. In times of crisis, state ultimately helps the bourgeois class. This also we know, yes or no? So when you talk about it, so you will mention this, and of course you will give proper, because it's a 20 marker. जैसे आप इसको open करोगे, you will also see that the role of state is varying. Okay? Then how relevant are these theories in explaining the role of state? अब ये बताओ आप. And I've already explained it to you how to answer this question. Just think about it. Take 30 seconds. First वाले part में you have enough content to write, but second part is very important. Question अब ये, this is open ended. Okay? अच्छा, एक और चीज है, whenever the question says, you don't write it in the first person that yes I think they are relevant. नहीं, ऐसे नहीं लिखना है. Generally writing, either write it from scholar's view or write it from school of thought view. Okay? That the relevance of the current theories in the 21st century is, you can write either debatable or contested. क्यों? क्योंकि you also know that these theories are not able to explain post-colonial state. They are not able to explain diversity. They are not able to explain in the ecological things. These theories are having limited relevance. So in the current changing world order, they cannot be used to fully understand it, which is why question के end में ये होना चाहिए that the role of state must be understood from various perspectives, and no single perspective can give you a true understanding. That is the true essence of the question, which also means that in this question you will talk about the rise of feminist theory of state, pluralist theory of state. In our syllabus there are many theories of state. Liberal, Marxist है, उसके बाद क्या है? Neoliberal, और क्या है, pluralist, post-colonial, feminist, post-modern. So you will say the rise of new theories of state simply tells us these theories are having limited relevance. Yes, and in this, that is why for each of the theory you can just mention that with their scholar, just small part. So now in this question, if I were to visualize this question, 20 markers are, and again please remember 20 markers, वरना बहुत बार क्या होता है, generally in the sectional test people don't give 20 markers, but I am of the firm belief in the full tests you will get 10, 15, 20, so why not start from the very start. वरना बहुत बार क्या होता है, people only practice 10 markers or people only practice 15 markers. You should know from the very start and set the correct expectations. Okay, now in this question your elaboration, and let's say you end your question somewhere here, again there is no compulsion that you write all. होगा, हो सकता है आपके almost content यहाँ पे खत्म हो जाए, but if somebody has a very big font then you can end it till here. Okay, which means almost relevance वाला part यहाँ पे आएगा पूरा, 1.5 page for relevance, and these 2 pages will be there for compare and contrast the theories, which addresses both parts of the question really well. So this addresses the first part and this overall addresses the second part, and then here itself let's say you have an overall conclusion, because many students while seeing the discussions they are not able to visualize it. अब थोड़ा idea लग रहा है कैसे इसको present करेंगे, so slowly slowly in your mind then you will have an idea, अच्छा मुझे ये question यहाँ पे खत्म करना है, this is where I need to change the paragraph, this is where I need to change the perspective. That gets you, and then that helps you understand better. Okay, so relevance of these theories, because with the rise of new social movements, okay, so if I say relevance में overall, why is the relevance being contested? Relevance क्यों change हो रहा है? पहली बात तो let's say with the rise of new social movements, okay, with the rise of new theories and perspectives, like post-colonial, feminists, okay, pluralists, ecological, etc., etc. Okay, and overall our point has to talk about that no single theory can give an understanding. Same points if you say, if I give you a question, how relevant is Marxist understanding for understanding Indian national movement? So you will say to some extent it helps, but it cannot give me a complete picture. To understand the complete picture I need to know, and I need to understand it from various lenses and thoughts and then integrate it, right? And which is again the beauty of political science in general, right? So are we able to understand till here? Okay, so which brings me to the overall end of our discussion. Acha, now there are a few things I'll tell you. How many of you joined the Telegram group? Acha, dekho. Again, few steps you have to follow. Number 1, those who have joined in, they have a separate private Telegram link. Okay, that they should join. Second, I've also mentioned how to contact me and again speak to me. अब जिसने भी कोर्स अभी थोड़ा सा लेट ज्वाइन किया है, just have a one-on-one call with me. You can also meet me offline. Here we will set the deadlines. Okay, let's say if you've joined in 2-3 days back, how to cover your backlog, the test 1, etc., and how to follow the schedule. Okay, so schedule, goal setting, etc., can be done. Okay, now the portal will be for uploading your copies will be created today. So whatever answers you're writing, you will upload it. Okay, and after your copy you get checked, we'll also have again a one discussion on this. In between also, if you have any doubt, you can reach out. Okay, now those of you who have already written test 1, right, try to maintain. Acha, I've also asked you try to maintain a diary also. Okay, in the diary you will basically write few things, otherwise वो भूल जाओगे आप. Test 1 में how many questions you attempted? Okay, let's say you attempted 9 out of 9. Fine. Then हाउ मच टाइम, जैसे आपको टाइम कितना लगा, एंड योर ओन असेसमेंट. उसके बाद ऑफ कोर्स वी विल डिस्कस एंड देन यू विल गेट अ डीपर पर्सपेक्टिव. योर असेसमेंट शुड इंक्लूड वेरी बेसिक थिंग्स. Did I have a proper introduction, body, conclusion? Did I write keywords? Was I able to revise, etc.? And your performance of these tests, because see, PSI 300 में effort बहुत लगेगा आपको. Okay, and the whole program is not just about watching few lectures here and there. यहाँ पे हर चीज covered है. We also do lectures. You also have, and in between I'll also have some live interaction with you. So constant motivation रहेगा आपको कि पूरे course में proper timeline है. आपको schedule follow करना है. ठीक है? What time did you follow introduction, body, conclusion, keywords, etc. आपने लिखे नहीं लिखे, वो सब आपको लिखना होगा. And then we will discuss and enrich it further. Now, the test 2 is now going to happen. So in case somebody has a backlog, try to cover this, okay? Because then otherwise, in the test 3 you have 2 weeks का break. तो वहाँ पे आप time को utilize कर सकते हो, right? अच्छे से I'll tell you how to do that. What are the topics here? Very short topics हैं ये. Equality, rights, democracy, and the second one is power, which includes hegemony, legitimacy, etc. ideology, right? Followed by its test. Again, I am repeating, whatever lectures you are doing, okay, these are very short, crisp lectures, but these are very comprehensive. That you would have seen. Pehla. If you have any other notes, you take that and synthesize them. ठीक है, lecture भी देखा, बहुत updated है सब कुछ अभी. With the notes combined, follow it up with the practice questions. Practice questions नहीं कर पा रहे, if you're less on time, follow its model answer. That also is shared with you. How many of you know how to navigate the portal? अच्छे से पता है ना? मैंने ऐसे मैसेज भी डाला है ग्रुप में, how to navigate, क्वेश्चन पेपर कैसे देखना है, डिस्कशन वीडियो. अच्छा ठीक है, मैं आपको अभी बता दूंगा नहीं तो, ठीक है, ओके. If somebody has an issue in navigating the portal etc. or how to see the question paper and model answer, the discussion, you also let me know. ठीक है, नहीं तो अगेन फिर से स्क्रीनशॉट भेज के मैं बता दूंगा. This is what you have to do. So here you will see the lectures, do the practice questions, do your revisions, and then finally attempt the test. And test के बाद भी it does not end here. Now when you discuss with an open mind, here आज भी कुछ नई चीज मिलेंगी सीखने को. So that is the purpose of having a live discussion. So try to attend it, be interactive, that would help. ठीक है? Okay. So with this, I'll take your leave. Okay. In case somebody wants to ask questions, you can sit back. I'll take your doubts. Okay. Again, the people who are watching this online, if you have any other doubt related to this program, still, if somebody is new who want to still reach out, you can contact me on this number. Okay. Or you can drop a WhatsApp message, and then we can connect. Okay. So that is all from my side. Okay. Thank you so much.